I have tasted peat water before, because
You've tasted peat water.
yeah, because I was stranded in in this area in West Kalimantan. In one
Okay.
of the projects that I was doing there, we were doing not hazy assessment, but we were measuring the carbon in those areas.
Welcome, folks, to the 7th episode of the Terra podcast, and we're back here with an Earth Day special. We have a very, very interesting speaker, so to say, an expert in the nature field. But before diving a bit deeper, I think a bit of a context setting as we jump into the session. The topic is on nature, and this is a Earth Day special, so it's synonymous. And specifically honing in Malaysia, right? And for those who may not be familiar, Malaysia is oftentimes renowned as a mega biodiverse region. It's one of 17 in the world, and it's a very short list of countries that fall under that category. And we should indeed be privileged to be one of those countries with a vast array of different species, and also endemic species specifically as well. But a bit of an overview of our guest, Surin. So Surin has spent over 2 decades of his life within the intersection of science, policy, and practice. He's been in the field of, he's been on the ground shaping sustainable supply chains in a vast array of different commodities, specifically palm oil. And he's, of course, done a lot of work in Southeast Asia. And an interesting fact, for those who would actually search him up, he's actually co-founded Sunda Shelves. It's Malaysia's only and first nature-themed bookshop. I've been there. Feel free to go check them out. It's amazing. They have an amazing space. They're down in Taman Tun, Taman Sora Kim. And he's also currently serving as the board member for BCSD Malaysia, right? And Surin has a vision or mission to turn nature commitments into real, measurable corporate actions. Well, Surin, welcome to the show here today.
Thank you, Kevin.
Well, diving a bit deeper, I wanted to just understand a thing. I think being fellow conservationists, there has to be that turning point, the first time that an experience that you would have experienced, something that you would have happened or observed that kind of changed your mind. Like, this is what I want to do. This is what I want to contribute to. Because it's very much passion oriented. What was that point for you that drove you into the conservation scene?
Oh, okay. We have to go way back. I wouldn't say it's one single thing. I think that as a child, I was very much exposed to nature. Although I was born in KL, my parents from a small town, small village called Baling in Kedah.
Baling, okay.
But I used to travel back to Kedah a lot, and every time there was a long school break, they would just dump me there with my grandparents. So I was doing all the kampung kind of things, swimming in the river, catching prawns and fish, running in the paddy fields and all that, right? So I guess from a very young age, I was already very much in tune with, being out in nature. And then I think basically the love of nature was already there from the very beginning.
It was a very innate thing in a
Yeah,
way.
innate. Yeah, exactly. And then my grandparents were farmers, so they know a lot about agriculture and wildlife and so on, right? And when I was deciding what to do, what course to take for my undergraduate studies, I decided to take something related to biology.
Okay.
I ended up doing biotech because I didn't really know what options were out there. But through a kind of a long-winded route, I ended up doing conservation.
If you have one word of advice for a budding conservationist, imagine early school leaver or those who are actually just, some of them finished their SPM recently.
Right.
You had your SPM grades that come out just a couple of weeks ago. What would be that one piece of advice that you have for them if they want to pursue conservation?
I think that you need to understand nature first and foremost, right? So I wrote an article actually about how nature is now missing from our school syllabus. And I think this is a really big mistake because, maybe they're learning things like environmental management, things like recycling and water footprint and pollution, all that kind of stuff. But when I say nature, I mean you need to know what are the living things around you. You know, at least know the common plants, common animals that you see. And I think this element is missing already. Right? So I think we need to go back to having nature studies in school, right? Because they used to teach nature studies in school during my mom's time. I have the textbook. I have old textbooks that that talk about trying to educate kids about nature.
Yeah.
And I think we should have that back in school.
Yeah. Interesting gap. So in line with that, we've kind of mentioned early on that Malaysia is a biodiverse nation, so to say, and many of our viewers may not be aware of that. But for you as well, you play this very interesting role where you walk this fine line between, being on the ground, doing the conservation work, but also walking into boardrooms and dealing with C-suite, senior management and the board of directors. And how do you manage those realities? How do you, in a way, translate the on-the-ground realities all the way up to the boardrooms?
Yeah, it's quite challenging. I think for most people who are at the board level, especially those who have been more in the like finance line and so on, right? They may not have stepped into a forest before. So and that's why I mentioned earlier, I stressed the point about having actually the opportunity to know what nature is all about, because it's hard to describe why nature is important if you've never experienced it yourself firsthand, right? So one of the things that I've tried to do in more recent years is to bridge that gap. So I've been involved in corporate training whereby it could be like a 1 week ESG course, right? But at least one component of it brings the CEOs or at least senior management people into the forest. And it doesn't have to be a hardcore kind of wilderness site like Taman Negara or anything like that, So usually for that kind of program, we would just take people around KL itself, right? Because we have nature spots around KL. It could be Taman Tugu or Bukit Gasim, Bukit Kiara, nearby spots. But at least get them to experience that. Right? So then it's easier to tell the story when you're out in the field and you try to relate what you see with nature. I always try to tell people, like, when we see plants, what are the users of the plants? Like some of the economic plants, for example, may have been the building blocks of our economy back in the early days, and people don't realize that. Then that's when you emphasize things like nature.
Diving a bit more deeper now, we're going to cover a concept. We fleshed out that acronym early on, HCV or High Conservation Value. You've written about it during your time at ProForest as well.
Yeah.
And perhaps for the audience here today, breaking it down in first simple language, what is HCV? And would you be able to, first take us down to the 6 components to the framework?
Yeah.
And also, how does it apply in like real world realities? How can like corporates and entities actually leverage on it?
Okay, I mean, HCV is a good example, right? Because it really is about conservation values. And by conservation values here, it's not just the biodiversity values. You mentioned the 6 elements. So 4 of them are grounded in nature, if you want to call it that. And then the other last 2 elements are more, well, there's an overlap. Last 3 elements have more of a local community or social element to it. So just to quickly run down the 6 values. The first one is about species, So we normally talk about rare, threatened, endangered species. I think this one, people can relate to it, like you have the Malayan tiger is going extinct. So, you have to save that. That's a conservation value. The second one is talking about large landscapes, large natural ecosystems, whether it's forests or wetlands, whatever, where it's still relatively intact and fairly large. So you want to maintain the connectivity and all that. So that's the second value. Third value is about rare, threatened, endangered ecosystems. People get confused about this because species are a bit more easy to kind of comprehend. But when we talk about ecosystems, we are saying the living, the ecology of that place, right? Whether it is the limestone hills or wetland patch or the mountain top. So these are different types of ecosystem. So certain ecosystems are more threatened than others. Like limestone hills is a good example because they're being quarried and all that, but they actually hold a lot of biodiversity. So that's HCV3, the third element. HCV4 about ecosystem services, and this would be like, water catchment areas, areas which is important for soil protection and so on, right? So climate as well, you could consider that. HCV5 is natural resources that are important for the livelihoods, of local community. So if they depend on something, and it could be medicinal plants, it could be fish in the river. So those are resources that the community needs. So that's HCV5, and HCV6 are cultural values. So these could be tangible, it could be intangible, But wherever you have cultural elements, could be a burial ground, for example, or sacred tree. Right, these are what we call HCV6 values, lah. So how does it factor in when it comes to corporate responsibility? So I guess the most straightforward example would be when you are planning to clear a piece of land, right? Could be a forest, could be a wetland patch, and you need to do the HCV assessment. So many banks, many financial institutions now are actually requiring that if there is new land clearing in an ecologically sensitive area, then the proponent, the company that is planning to do that project, they have to do a HCV assessment to see whether any of these 6 values are there or not, right? And if the values are present, then you have to manage it, right? I mean, of course, the best approach would be not to go ahead with the land clearing if possible. But if some of it need to be cleared, then we have to decide like which are the most important patch. Which patches are the most important that we say, essentially no-go areas.
Okay.
Some areas maybe you can develop, but with some conditions. And some areas maybe no high conservation values are present and you can go ahead and clear. So this is becoming a requirement. So one example that I can relate to where it really did make a difference was when I was doing a HCV assessment in West Kalimantan, part of Indonesia, and we were surveying an area which was mostly heath forest. I don't know whether you're familiar with heath forest. It's a kind of very sandy soil, sandy ecosystem. Usually not well forested.
Okay.
It looks like a wasteland. So for most people, when they see a patch of heath forest, or in Malay we call it kerangas, they might think that, it's wasteland, just go ahead and develop it, right? There's nothing there. But if you look closely, even within those sandy soil areas, there could be some unique plants and animals, right? So a good example of plants that are quite special to heath forests are the pitcher plants.
The pitcher plants.
Right? Pitcher plants tend to live in sandy soil.
Soil, okay.
When you think about it, it makes sense, right? Because what do you know about pitcher plants? They
are carnivores.
They're carnivores. They trap insects and small animals, right? Why do they do that? Because they don't get enough nutrients from the soil. So in sandy soil, the ground, the organic layer is very thin. Right? So then they don't get enough nutrients from the soil. Okay. That's why they trap the insects.
They derive it from...
They get the nutrients from the insects. They have to essentially look for their
Okay.
own food, right?
Yeah.
So in this patch of heath forest in West Kalimantan, then I discovered that place has got a really interesting diversity of plants. Some of them could be potentially rare, could be endemic as well, right? So our recommendation to the company, it was our palm plantation company, is that you should protect this patch. You shouldn't, plant your oil palm there, and they essentially took on board that recommendation.
Speaking of oil palm, and I think peatlands is another. You've done quite a bit of work for it. And peatlands, they're not a lot. I think it's about 3% of the world that consists of 3%, I believe, sub 10%. Don't quote us on about that, but it's a very very unique ecosystem, so to say, and they're carbon sinks, right?
Yeah.
They're carbon sinks, so they trap carbon, and they play a very vital role. However, in a lot of your studies, you've seen it both as a crisis and opportunity involving peatland, especially with the slash and burn processes when it comes to agribusiness. And for those who are not familiar with what peatlands are, could you help maybe? I mean, some of them have not been to a peatland or even a forest. Could you help define, if you're standing at a peatland right now, what are the senses that you would kind of be immersed?
All right. Wow. Okay. Trying to basically
rewind
explain
back.
peatland in 5 minutes or so.
Yeah.
Okay. Basically, if you understand the basic ecological cycle of a forest, let's say, trees grow, they die, and then they rot. Right. That's the normal process. The unique thing about peat swamp areas is that, for whatever reason, it's mainly related to the hydrology and the soil type. The dead plant materials don't decompose completely, right? So basically, the organic layer stays. And usually because it's waterlogged. So when it's underwater, the plant materials underwater doesn't rot properly, and it remains that way for a long time. Could be centuries, could be thousands of years. Over time, then the organic layer accumulates. Can be several meters or more. Could be even tens of meters deep, right? So all that is just carbon. It's just carbon. It's being stored. But when you drain it, you remove the water, the organic layer then becomes exposed. Because, you're usually below the water table.
Yeah.
But then when you drain the water out, the organic layer gets exposed. Then they start to rot. They start to decompose. This releases GHG
emissions.
I mean, the mix of greenhouse gases, not
Because it
just
breaks
carbon
down.
dioxide, methane, and many other gases, right?
Yeah.
And then you have a huge GHG emission because of
it's
that.
a double whammy when you burn it down as well.
If it burns, then it gets worse, because when it burns, then the fire can travel underground. So it's not just the top layer. Then you're talking about meters of burning peat, and again, that's a huge GHG emission. In a peat,
Where would be the nearest peatland from here? Would it be Kuala Selangor?
Kuala Selangor, if you're talking about the coastal area proper, then it's actually mangrove.
Mangrove.
Right? Mangrove is mainly muddy. Right?
Yeah.
But the peat swamp areas would be North Selangor peat swamp.
Not Selangor.
So
Okay.
you're talking about Batam Juntai, that area.
Yeah. Does MNS have a ecotourism?
I'm not sure about ecotourism, but I
Yeah.
know GEC is the Global
Environment Centre,
They're
yeah.
running a project there to
Okay.
restore the
peatland.
peatlands there. The other close by area is in Kuala Langat.
Kuala Langat.
Right?
Okay. Yeah.
You know where Gambuda Cove is? Yeah.
Gambuda Cove.
Somewhere in that area. If you're driving down from KL to KLIA, then you can see a
Yeah.
bit of peat swamp forest left on either side of the highway, the elite highway, right? So so in the peat swamp area, and because there's this deep organic layer, and it's still decomposing very slowly, right? So when you walk on a peat swamp area, it's very bouncy. It's like walking on spring.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's quite distinctive. That's number one. Number two, because of the decomposing organic material, the water, any kind of water body in that area usually would have a dark tea-colored kind of, tea color basically, tea-colored water.
You call it teh tarik.
Teh tarik is
colour.
because of the tannin.
Yeah.
So plant leaves, just
The
like your
tannins,
tea,
like
just
tea,
like the tea you drink, there's tannin in there that stains the water.
Okay.
So,
It's from tannins, not the soil actually, the colour.
well, essentially the organic materials in the
The
soil,
detritus, yeah.
right? So that's why you have this stained color.
Okay.
It can be very dark as well. So sometimes people call peat swamp areas black water, basically. Yeah.
Okay.
So many places when you come across them, they're called air hitam. It usually signifies that place is the peat swamp area.
Peat swamp. Okay.
I have tasted peat water before, because
You've tasted peat water.
because I was stranded in this area in West Kalimantan on one of the projects that I was doing there. We were doing not HSV assessment, but we were measuring the carbon in those areas.
Okay.
And the water, the rivers were very dry
Okay.
because it was a dry season, right? So we were surveying till quite late. And by that time, I ran out of water, and the boat couldn't come in to fetch us because, we were quite deep inside, and the boats can't navigate the rivers anymore because the rivers were all dried up.
Yeah.
So I had no choice. Like, I actually had to drink the peat water, and it was like
Shifting gears, talking a bit of about Sunda Shelves, and it feels like quite an interesting move. So to say, you've co-founded this with your partner Dylan, I believe, right?
Yep.
Yeah, and what was the whole thought process behind Sunda Shelves, and what's your why behind Sunda Shelves?
yes, good question. Yeah, sometimes I ask why as well.
Yeah.
No, but it was something that came up quite some time back actually. Even while I was working with WWF Malaysia, I already realized that there is a gap in terms of the where you get your knowledge resources from. Yeah, and certainly it's hard to find books on nature or natural history. By the way, I should correct something you said earlier. We are not actually the first or the only nature bookshop in Malaysia. I mean, Peninsular Malaysia, yes, we are the only bookshop.
In Peninsula, okay.
Yeah, but we are not the first because M&S used to have.
Oh yeah, they had a library.
No, they had a bookshop as well.
A bookshop?
Yeah, there used to be a bookshop.
Is it a for-profit thing or more of a?
It was run by a third party, so it was a for-profit thing. And if you are ever in Kota Kinabalu in Sabah, there is a really good nature bookshop there called Borneo Books.
Borneo Books,
so that was partly our inspiration. So basically, we realized, independently, Dylan also had this idea of having a nature bookshop, and independently we wrote a concept note about it. Right?
Okay.
So then, more recently, about 3 years ago, before we started the bookshop, we compared notes and we said, hey, basically it's the same idea. So why don't we just go ahead and do it? Yeah. So basically, we want to make it accessible to people. And most of our books are actually not very technical.
Okay.
We do have some technical books, but we have a lot of books that are more accessible, more like popular science kind of books, guidebooks, like how to identify birds, which anybody can use. And we have for the beginners up to more advanced level. We also have fiction, and some of the fiction is about nature. So, you can learn about nature in many ways. Right? Yeah. You don't have to just use one way of learning it. You can learn it from, through a multimedia approach. There are songs about nature, there are movies about nature. So we try to cover some of that. Just try and make it as we have even board games. Some board games locally designed. Okay. Some are related to nature. So, and some are for kids, right? We have kids' books. So basically, we just try and find ways in which people can start getting into nature.
Yeah. Well, folks, for those who are interested to check them out, I'll leave the link in the description and head on over to Sunda Shelves. We're towards the tail end of our section here today, and I think I would like to, since it's an Earth Day episode, and the whole show, this episode is based upon a conservationist message to the people out there, especially to the Malaysians out there. Now, looking out in the long term, you've been in the space for 2 decades. Looking further away for the next 2 decades, the next 20 years, what gives you hope for Malaysia's natural heritage? And what do you hope to see unravel in the coming years in terms of achieving those long-term aspirations?
Oh, those are big questions. Maybe I can first talk about what you mentioned earlier on, Malaysia being one of the megadiverse countries. And although we do have our own set of problems, I mean, as a conservationist, I'm never happy with how our natural resources are managed. We can always do things better, right? But just to put it into perspective, right? We are a tropical nation. We are a tropical Southeast Asian nation, right? And I think if we compare ourselves across the board, we are not doing too badly in the sense that we are almost at a developed status now, but we have managed to retain about 50% of forest cover. I say about because depending on which statistics you look at, it could be below 50% or it could be higher.
There's a movement on that now. That's the case.
Yeah, so it's all about the methodology, how they measure forest cover. Yeah, but yeah, I mean, all things considered, if we do become a developed country with about 50% of our tropical forests intact, and if we can manage to not lose our tigers in the process, no other countries have that. You know, so I think that a bio-based future is the way to go because that's our natural advantage. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you very much and very eloquently put there. Well, we've come to the end of another episode of the Terra podcast, and I hope the information you find is not just timely but also useful. And I think my parting message as well. I mean, I've not been in the space nearly as long as you, but I mean, coming back to Malaysia, I mean, I was a bit involved in the limestone cave and karst space, and I think it's just sad to see the average Malaysian not being aware of the richness that we have just behind our backyard. Sometimes when you just hear the frogs outside, I mean, don't just shoo it away next time. Just remember from this podcast that it's a very important bioindicator species. So if there's frogs behind, very likely there's a lot of other life out there, and there's a whole ecosystem behind your backyard. So think twice again before trying to kill that frog or even shoo it away. Well, folks, thank you for tuning in yet again, and stay tuned for future episodes for the Terra podcast. And if you found this episode helpful, or you know someone who might find this informative, please feel free to like, subscribe, or even share it to this person. And thank you again, and signing out.